In Ted, I give you my assurance standing here. I know him. In Ted, we have someone who will not sell out, who knows what he believes, who knows why he believes it. He was rather well taught. And when the going gets tough, will simply get tougher. Please join me in welcoming Ted Cruz.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so very, very much. It is wonderful to be with you. Thank you for that incredibly generous introduction. We all know Robbie George. Robbie has been a dear friend, a mentor, a professor. He is a brilliant scholar and a fearless defender of the principles and ideals that have made our nation great. But I'll tell you a couple of things I bet you don't know about Robbie George. Number one, he can play a mean banjo. There are very, very few scholars at Princeton that can whip out dueling banjos straight out of Deliverance. And number two, he has a considerable mischievous streak. So Professor George was my thesis advisor in college. He also advised me in my junior paper. When I got my junior paper back from him, the front corner of the paper was folded down, and on it a grade was written, C+, which he handed to a 20-year-old who he knew who took himself far, far too seriously. And I have to admit, I held the junior paper, my knuckles turned white, and I began having visions of that I wouldn't get into law school, that my entire life was over. And as I sat there trembling, I flipped the corner over and it said, "Just kidding, eh?" That is a true story. And I intend to send Professor George the years of therapy bills thereafter. You know, together, we are engaged in a noble journey, a noble venture. I want to thank everyone who is here with the American Principles Project, because we are defending the extraordinary legacy that is this nation. No other nation in the history of the world has been as unique and extraordinary as our nation. The founders began this country by fighting a revolution. First with bayonets. And for the record, there are today more bayonets in the military than there were in 1916. And then, more importantly, a revolution of ideas. For millennia, men and women had been told that our rights came from kings and queens. They were given by grace or by whim by monarchs to be taken away at their discretion. The framers inverted the very concept of sovereignty. That we said our rights don't come from any monarch and they don't come from a president. They come from Almighty God. And we began our nation based on the immortal principle that we hold these principles to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That was an extraordinary shift in the basic understanding of where rights come from, and that sovereignty resides not with government, with the people. And it is lent to government, but the role of the Constitution, as Jefferson told us, is to serve as chains to bind the mischief of government. And under that system, we have seen the most extraordinary prosperity, this world has ever seen. What I want to talk about tonight is two very simple things. Number one, why we lost this election a couple of weeks ago. And number two, I want to humbly suggest a path forward. Why did we lose? It wasn't, as the media would tell you, because the American people embraced big government and Barack Obama and spending and debt and taxes. If you look at exit polling, 43% of voters who voted on Election Day said we need more government. A majority said government does too much, we need smaller government. That wasn't what happened there. I have to admit there's some conservatives I know who have been channeling Ed Koch, who when he was defeated as mayor of New York said, "The people have spoken, and now they must be punished." More than a few conservatives have said, well, if the voters want to bankrupt our country, let them suffer the consequences. That wasn't what the voters voted for. I'm going to suggest to you a very simple reason why we lost on Election Day. We didn't win the argument. We didn't even make the argument. Margaret Thatcher famously said, first you win the argument, then you win the election. 53% of voters coming out of the polls said the economy was George W. Bush's fault. Now, why is that? Maybe because the president said every single day it's George W. Bush's fault. And Republicans were curled up in the fetal position, so terrified of uttering the words George W. Bush, that we never bothered to contest that proposition. I mean, this was a race. How many of you have heard of the phrase, the war on women? What an utterly ridiculous notion. They ran a presidential campaign suggesting that Republicans want to take away contraceptives. Now, we saw this attack foreshadowed when George Stephanopoulos, out of nowhere, asked this random question at the debate. And by the way, why on earth do we have people like George Stephanopoulos moderating Republican debates? The notion that Republicans want to take away anyone's contraceptives is absolute and complete nonsense. I do not know a single Republican on the face of the planet who wants to ban contraceptives. Listen, my wife and I have 2 little girls. I'm thrilled we don't have 17. What was this issue about? Everyone here knows what this issue was about. It had nothing to do with banning contraceptives, with government stepping in and saying they would prevent men and women from choosing to use contraceptives if they so desired. This was entirely about religious liberty. There are a lot of men and women in this room who fought the brave and valiant fight standing up and defending religious liberty. You want to think about just how far we've come. Not long ago, the Democratic Party was proud to have been the first major party to have nominated the first 2 Catholic nominees to be President of the United States. I ask you, what would an Al Smith or a John F. Kennedy say to a President of the United States who says to the Catholic Church, change your religious beliefs, or I will use my power as President to shut down your hospitals and your charities? This is a radical view, and you know what? Republicans were too afraid to even talk about it. We didn't win the argument. So that leads to the second thing I want to talk about. What is the path forward? I'll tell you what the path forward isn't. It isn't abandon our principles. Every election in which Republicans win, there are stories that are written. The problem is those pesky conservatives. If they just became Democrats, it would be so much better. Those stories were written before the election day was over. And much has been written about the demographic challenges, and in particular the Hispanic community. There is no doubt Republicans have got to do a better job in the Hispanic community. But let me tell you, even that, the issue is not, as the media would suggest, 100% about immigration. That is the obsessive focus of the media with respect to the Hispanic community. Now, immigration matters, especially tone. No one is going to vote for you if they think you don't like them. I think Republicans need to remain a party that supports securing the border and stopping illegal immigration, and at the same time welcomes and celebrates legal immigrants, champions legal immigration. Americans by choice. That's what Ronald Reagan called legal immigrants. But let me tell you, we did polling of the Hispanic community in the state of Texas. You know what the number one issue in the Hispanic community in the state of Texas was? Jobs and the economy. By 52%. Immigration, 5% gave you the answer. It ain't the answer just to suddenly talk about immigration and forget everything else. I'm going to suggest instead a different path, which is that as Republicans, we need to embrace what I call opportunity conservatism. Now, what does that mean? What opportunity conservatism means is that we need to conceptualize, we need to articulate conservative domestic policy with a laser focus on opportunity, on easing the means of ascent up the economic ladder. We need to look at it from the perspective of those at the very bottom working to achieve the American dream, and every policy we talk about needs to be focused very directly on that. You want to know why Barack Obama won 71% of the Hispanic vote? The tone on immigration contributed, but I think far more important was 47%. And it wasn't that comment. Everyone, if you put a camera on their face all day long, will say something poorly. I think Mitt Romney is a good man, a man of character, a man who ran a hard, disciplined campaign. But Republicans nationally, the story we conveyed is the 47% are stuck in a static world. We don't have to worry about you. It's what that clip famously said. I cannot think of an idea more antithetical to the American principles this country was founded on. This country was founded on the principle that anyone at the very bottom can achieve anything. We embraced in that comment and in the narrative we made to this country the Democrat notion that there is a fixed and static pie. The rich are the rich, the poor are the poor, and all that matters is redistributing from the one to the other. The essence of the conservative message should be we want a dynamic nation where anybody with nothing can achieve anything. Now let me give you several examples of what I mean by opportunity conservatism. Number one is jobs and the economy. But listen, jobs in the economy is not a story about big business. One of the greatest lies in politics is the lie that Republicans are the party of big business. You know what? Big business does just great with big government. Big business hops in bed with big government. They hire armies of lobbyists. They get special favors, and they do just great. Republicans are and should be the party of entrepreneurs, of small businesses, of those climbing the top, seeking to start a company in their garage and topple the big businesses that are there. You know, when you talk about jobs in the economy, 2/3 of all new jobs in the economy come from small businesses. Did you know there are 2.3 million Hispanic small business owners? There are roughly 50 million Hispanics in this country. If you assume 2 per household, that means 1 in 10 Hispanic households is a small business owner. If you want to look at the history of climbing the economic ladder over and over and over again for centuries in our country, it has been through small businesses. It has been through the opportunity of a free and dynamic economy. Look, if you go to a socialist nation, the rich do just fine. If you happen to be fortunate enough to be born a Rothschild, you can enjoy some very fine cognac and brandy. But God help you if you didn't happen to be born into the life of luxury. The reason why millions have come from all over the globe to this country is there is no country on earth that presents that kind of economic mobility, that ability for people to start with nothing and achieve anything. And we should have been carrying that message every single day in the Hispanic community, in the African American community, in the American community. You know, the policies of Barack Obama did even more damage in the minority communities than they did throughout the country. Under Obama, Hispanic unemployment climbed over 10%. African American unemployment climbed to over 14%. And yet we did an incredibly poor job of articulating the message of opportunity. I'll give you another example, school choice. You want to talk about a policy that is fundamentally about transformational, changing the opportunities of those struggling to achieve the American dream. You know, the rich and middle class have always had school choice. If you happen to be wealthy, if you happen to go to the Bethesda public schools, if, God forbid, those schools suddenly had a 50% dropout rate, if they suddenly had drug dealers walking the hallways, kids getting assaulted in the bathrooms, if they had 50-60% illiteracy rates of the kids graduating in one day, those public schools would be empty because the parents have the checkbooks to write a check and move their kids. School choice is entirely about giving the poor, giving minorities, giving those trapped in failing schools the same ability to demand a better option that the rich and middle class have always had. I think school choice should be the civil rights issue of the next generation. You look at something like Social Security personal accounts. I think that's another transformational issue, but Republicans almost always argue this issue wrong. We put on our green eye shade and we start talking like accountants. We say, if you look at the long-term actuarial soundness of the Social Security system, it is clearly in jeopardy. Which, for most of us in this room, that makes sense. But I hate to tell you, it doesn't move a whole lot of people. The late Daniel Patrick Moynihan called Social Security personal accounts the final culmination of FDR's New Deal. It is an estate not just for every millionaire, but for every bellman at the door. Because what it enables someone to do, let's take right now. Right now, the status quo, you have an African-American man who's working as a janitor. You have an Hispanic woman who is cleaning houses, who works his or her fingers to the bone, pays into the system year after year after year. They retire. They get a couple of years Social Security payments, and then they die. That's the status quo right now. You take that very same African-American man, Hispanic woman, have a system where they can pay into the system and at the same time have a portion of their tax funds going to a personal account. That same janitor, that same maid, earning very, very modest sums, $20,000 a year, $25,000 a year, can over the course of a working life accumulate $100,000, $150,000, $200,000. They retire, they receive retirement payments, and when they die, those are assets they own, they can pass on to their kids and grandkids. Those are assets they can use to start a business, to buy a home, to get an education. What a transformational policy. The simplest principle behind opportunity conservatism is the aphorism all of us know. Give a man a fish, you will feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you'll feed him for a lifetime. We need to be defending the opportunity to take responsibility for your own life, to take control of your own life, because that has been what has led to the extraordinary prosperity in this country. It cuts across virtually every issue. Sound money, something this organization has been a tremendous leader on. You know, we're in the middle of QE infinity right now. And when you see the currency debased, which, by the way, politicians love, it's the best way to pay for spending money is to crank up the printing presses. When you see the currency debased, it is a cruel tax on everyone working and struggling and saving, as we've seen gold skyrocket, we've seen oil skyrocket, we've seen food skyrocket, we've seen the cost of living for those struggling to climb the economic ladder get higher and higher and higher. And every bit as problematic, the savings and investments of those people climbing the ladders have been devalued. If you want to start a business, you need to be able to save the resources to do it. And if your government is not protecting sound money, your ability to work towards opportunity is seriously compromised. I'll give you one final example of what I mean by opportunity conservatism, because what I'm suggesting is a lens to cover domestic policy across the range. Gun rights. Now, there's something people might say, well, that has utterly nothing to do with this. Look, I'm from Texas. In Texas, our definition of gun control is hitting what you aim at. When I was the Solicitor General of Texas, one of the things I was honored to do is lead a coalition of states supporting Dick Anthony Heller challenging the D.C. gun law and defending our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. After that landmark decision, that 5-4 victory protecting that fundamental right, I had the experience, I went on NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, was debating the Attorney General of D.C., who was pledging, in words that would have made Bull Connor proud, massive resistance. We will not obey this decision. We will do all that we can to fight it at every level. In the course of that discussion, I said, you know, it's very interesting, gun control and gun regulations. The rich can subcontract their personal safety. You can live in an affluent neighborhood, you can live in a neighborhood where you pay taxes, where you have police presence, where if you choose not to own a firearm, your personal safety is covered by others who are bearing firearms and protecting you. But if you're a single woman living in Anacostia, riding the subway and working 2 jobs, living next to a crack house, struggling to feed your kids, what you're saying is that single mom cannot protect herself if someone comes through the window to harm her kids. I got to tell you, the D.C. Attorney General hated that argument. And he hated it because you Republicans, you're not supposed to, those are our people. We own the poor, we own minorities. Look, I'm something that's not supposed to exist, an Hispanic Republican. One of the saddest things about Republicans is a great many of us, we're right, and we have utterly no idea why. Let me suggest an experiment to you. The next time you see a Republican politician on television and the topic of race or class comes up, turn off the volume. Just watch his or her body language. Most Republicans think we're wrong. Can we talk about capital gains taxes? I can talk about those. How utterly maddening. Listen, the policies of the left do not work. The policies of the left have destroyed the educational system, have devastated the communities, in African American communities and Hispanic communities, have broken up marriages, have led to dependency. As far as I'm concerned, the purveyors of these failed policies should bear their head in shame. Now, it's not through malice. I would not suggest that. But they're consistently selling elixirs that do not work. And most Republicans don't understand that. You know, if you want to look to the narrative of the history of our country, I'll share in closing briefly a brief narrative from my family and the power of freedom and a free market system. My grandfather in Cuba, when he was 17, que bueno. When my grandfather was 17, his father, my great-grandfather, died of influenza. My grandfather was working at a sugarcane plantation in Cuba. Where he worked, it was a company town. They didn't pay the employees wages. They paid them credits at the company store. And you never were able to accumulate anything. What it was in effect was generational slavery. Because you were constantly just thriving on those credits and you could not save a dime. A bus came by the town, the plantation where my grandfather was working, and they were offering people $5 and a sandwich to come to a political rally. My grandfather got on the bus and said, "I'm never coming back." And he went to a beach town in Cuba. He went up to a fruit stand, a kiosk that was standing on the beach. And he went to the owner and said, "I'd like to work here." For the next couple of years, my grandfather slept on the floor of that fruit stand and worked in the fruit stand selling fruit. A couple years later, the owner of the fruit stand bought a grocery store, and my grandfather had saved enough money that he purchased that fruit stand from the owner and became a small business owner in Cuba. Now, fast forward to 1957. My father, as a teenager, was fighting in the Cuban Revolution. He was thrown in prison and he was tortured. He was beaten almost to death. To this day, my father is a pastor in Dallas. To this day, his front teeth are not his own because they were kicked in a Cuban jail when he was a teenager. He fled to Texas in 1957. He was 18. He couldn't speak a word of English. He had nothing but $100 sewn into his underwear. I don't actually advise carrying money in your underwear. But it does say something about inflation, that my grandfather needed $5, and just one generation later, my dad needed $100. If they had sound money, maybe that wouldn't be the problem. But my dad worked as a dishwasher, making 50 cents an hour, paid his way through college, and started a small business also. I got to tell you, if you went to that 18-year-old kid washing dishes in Austin, Texas, not able to speak English, and you said to him one generation later that his son would be asked and have the opportunity to serve in the United States Senate, I can't think of a concept more unimaginable to that 18-year-old kid. My dad has been my hero my whole life. But do you know what I find most extraordinary about his story? How commonplace it is. Every one of us in this room has a story just like that. Whether it's us or our parents or our great-great-grandparents, we are a nation where we are the children of those who engaged on epic journeys to freedom. That's the legacy of this country. We are a land where the most important values, what defines an American, the DNA of an American, is to value liberty and opportunity above all else. That's what's being jeopardized. So let me say this in closing. It's easy to be demoralized, to look at these elections and to throw up your hands in despair. Things can change very, very quickly. You know, President Obama was fond of saying in the debates, that he inherited the worst economy in the history of the universe. Apparently his historical memory wasn't all that great. Any of y'all remember 1978, 1979? Double-digit unemployment, 22% interest rates, gas lines, stagflation. In 1979, things looked dire. In 1979, our hostages were languishing in Iran for what ended up being 444 days, while a president wrung his hands with impotence, not knowing how to respond. And yet here's the word of encouragement I'll give you. It took Jimmy Carter to give us Ronald Reagan. And I am convinced the most long-lasting legacy of Barack Obama is going to be a new generation of leaders in the Republican Party standing up and defending liberty and getting back to the values of this country. Thank you, and God bless you.